welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is another one of those videos where I just can't stop making decks, and I make them at such a furious pace, especially recently, that I'm just throwing them out, a whole bunch of them in one video. My channel was originally created so long ago because I'm just cranking out all these decks. It started after Commander Legends. Well, me making decks started a long time before that. Pretty much was always the case, but after Commander Legends, obviously there was a ton of commanders to build around, and I just went nuts building decks, and I just, I'd make them, play, test them. It's neat, but I don't really like it. Toss it away. And I thought, why waste them? Why not throw them out there into the ether so that other people can enjoy them? That was the genesis of my channel, and I've been doing it ever since. However, a little bit of behind the scenes sort of scenario. It's a lot of work putting out individual deck techs for all of these random commanders. And again, I just make these off the top of my head. Sometimes there's new commanders, sometimes there's old commanders. A lot of them, especially in this video, are ones that I've recently talked about in videos where I'm like, hey, here's an idea for a deck. And then I'm like, actually, that's not a bad idea. And I go ahead and make it myself and I try it out. And again, a lot of these I'm making it for myself, or I'm making it just because I'm curious to see if it'll work. And I'm not really doing it myself, so I'll throw it out there for you guys to use. This has been the year for making decks for me. This is probably the record for me with the amount of decks I've made this year. This is the third video I've done like this. Okay, if you haven't checked out the other two, go ahead. I had, 10 or 12 decks in each one. I'm not sure how many I have here, something around that. But yeah, this is the third video already just this year where it's like, I can't stop making decks. Here's a whole bunch of decks. You guys have fun with them if you want to. So, of course, all the deck lists for these will be in the description below. If you're at all interested, let's get to it. And let's start out with the Verak Warp Sing Gear deck that I made. I already talked about this in my 5 builds video. There's quite a few from this list that are going to be from the 5 unique builds for 5 commanders. Because again, I come up with these ideas because I think they're interesting, and then I make them into videos. And sometimes when I make the videos, then I'm like, maybe I really like that idea. I'm going to do it myself. I already talked about the Val deck that I made in, again, I came up with that idea in the 5 builds video, and then I went with it myself, and then I added on another idea I had, that interesting homing sliver combo that I talked about in my 10 deck ideas video. So that was one, and that one I am still considering for actually putting it together in paper for myself. This one, not so much. So if you watch that video, I already added the deck list there, but I thought I would add it here as well. It's a lands theme where you are, that activated ability works good with the fetch lands, and you actually get a pretty damn decent amount of landfall triggers with this deck. There's a lot of other neat interactions going on here because you're bringing lands from your graveyard, all that stuff. You are paying life a lot, so I did add in a couple of the, axis of mortality, exchanging life totals things, because you can end up paying a whole ton of life and then maybe exchange it, right? Profane Transfusion is another one that I threw in the deck for that reason, where the exchange thing, just another little neat interaction in the deck that just actually happens to work because you're paying life a lot. So it's essentially a black-white landfall deck, which I think is really interesting. Really interesting to make a landfall theme outside of green. Next up, another deck I talked about in a 5 builds video. Same one, different one, not sure. It was the Alora Merry Thief Ninjas deck, right? I said that I thought Alora worked really good with ninjas because, of course, up to 1 target attacking creature can't be blocked, but then you bounce it to your hand. And there's a lot of different things you can do. There's a very interesting commander. That's why I talked about it in that video. It's not very popular. And I thought it would be really funny to do a blue-green ninja deck. I mean, doing blue-black you could do. There's a lot more ninjas there. But of course, we got a lot of great black-blue ninjas already. I thought a blue-green ninja. There are a few blue-green ninjas. Springleaf Avenger, probably the best option there. That's actually a really good ninja, a really good card in general. Super sweet art too. You ninjutsu it in for 4 mana. That's not much. 6/5. That's a big body on a ninja. Get something out of your graveyard, and then the next turn, right? So how this whole deck works, the next turn I attack with my Springleaf Avenger, and I don't want it to be blocked, so I make it unblockable with my Alora Merry Thief, and it gets in for damage. I get the damage trigger, and then I return to my hand, so that I can then ninjutsu it out again, right? So, and of course, there's a fair amount of blue ninjas, not a ton of green ones. I think there's like 3, but still, I thought it was a neat idea. And then I threw in a few other things as well that fit really nicely in the deck. Baron, Tellurian Archmage, what a slam dunk there, right? Returning things to your hand, everything. That's just nice card draw. Threw in some adventure stuff because I thought that works really good with the ninja theme as well, like Brazen Borrower, right? I can cast the petty theft side, bounce something. Then I can cast the creature side, obviously. I can flash out that 3/1 flyer. Of course, it's not easy to block because it's a flyer. And I can ninjutsu in my ninja, return the Brazen Borrower to my hand, and then repeat the cycle again and cast the adventure side, creature side, right? And you keep doing that. So the adventure stuff works really neat with ninjas as well. So I have some of that in the deck. Really neat deck. I guess I should mention the background is Master Chef. I found one that kind of fits, right? Commander creatures you don't have when this creature enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and other creatures you control enter the battlefield with a counter on it. So that works, right? Ninja enters the battlefield, put a counter on it, get him for more damage. Why not? It was the one that I thought fit the best. So if you're at all interested, the deck list is in the description. I made a Balrog deck, the Balrog of Moria, which I talked about in, which video was that? That was the one where it was, I think these were the most underplayed commanders from this year so far anyway. Just really, like, this is one of the least popular commanders from the Lord of the Rings set, which is pretty shocking because there's some pretty bad commanders there. I mean, there's a lot of commanders, so of course there's a lot of bad ones as well. This one is actually, I think, pretty good. I mean, 7 mana, 8/8 trample haste. That alone is like pretty darn good. And if it dies, you may exile it. If you do, for each opponent, exile up to 1 target creature that player controls. That's a great dice trigger. So there's a command. I mean, if you wanted to make a Voltron deck, I don't know if black and red are great for that, but an 8/8 trample haste. So you already got a lot to work with. And I really like the dice trigger. I always like dice triggers on commanders because then if my opponents end up killing it, well, at least I'm getting something out of it, right? And it's also a little bit of a deterrent, right? If your opponent has a really great creature on the battlefield, well, they're not going to kill your commander because they know they're going to lose their creature if they do. It also has the cycling, which is interesting, which is what I talked about in that video is what I think is one of the reasons why it isn't played because people are like, oh, I can't use the cycling, right? And even has, whenever you cycle it, you create 2 treasure tokens and people are like, okay, I can't do that from the command zone. So, if you ignore that, you don't need that part, but there is a lot of neat things that you can do here. Because your commander has a dice trigger, I'm doing the sacrifice theme a little bit. I have other creatures that, Orca Siege Demon, which is a big creature, big scary creature that has the dice trigger that works as well. I got Lizolda, which is a really neat sack outlet. Again, you could almost even swap out some commanders here a little bit. However, some of the neat things that work with the Balrog of Moria as well did a little bit, although there are only so many options. I mean, I got Command Beacon in here. I got Netherborn Altar in here. So you can put your commander into your hand because, I cycle 4 mana, cycle it. So essentially, I'm going to pay 4 mana, draw a card, and then create 2 treasure tokens, which is not great, but it's not bad. But of course, I'm throwing it into my graveyard so I can do the recursion thing as well. So I did that a little bit here as well. So I have, a little bit of discard theme, a little bit of recursion theme. There's a lot going on here. Maybe for the guy out there that really loves the Balrog, and I realize there is a better one, but from the movies, and you think it's just a cool creature because it is, this is a pretty neat deck. So there's an option for you. I made another Cosima, God of Voyage deck. And the reason, very specifically why, again, I think almost every deck I'm talking about here is in relation to a specific video I did. I did a video about Blue Ramp, very, very unique Blue Ramp. You can go watch that video if you want to. And, I was so impressed with those ideas. I thought it was so unique that I was like, you know what? I'm actually going to make that deck because the landfall theme in blue isn't super great unless you have a commander that's doing that. And Cosima's really the only commander that's doing that in mono blue anyway. I mean, if I had a Tatiova deck and I had a blue-green deck, just throw all the green stuff in there. All this blue stuff pales in comparison. So there'd be no reason to use it. So a mono blue commander is the only place that stuff fits. So Retraced Image, for example, right, is just a great way to get a land into play for just 1 mana. Dreamscape Artist, which is typically not a great ramp option. Here, though, it's pretty good. Like, discard a card and just sacrifice a land to search your library for 2 basic. That's not great unless you really want those landfall triggers, which, of course, you do. You exile your commander, then you start doing the whole landfall trigger thing. And then, of course, the really fun ones, Mitotic Manipulation, which is doing the same name thing. But, of course, in this deck, it's very easy to look at the top, 7 cards of your library, and then get a island, because of course you're going to have an island in play, and put it into play. So, 3 mana, put a land into play is not great. I'd say in mono blue, it's not bad though. That's a Wayfarer's Bauble, right? Wayfarer's Bauble is 1 mana. and then 2 mana, so that's 3 mana, put a land into play. And I will also point out that Methodic Manipulation puts it into play untapped, so it's not maybe better. It's okay. It's definitely okay. I think it's actually not a terrible ramp option in mono blue, to be quite honest. And of course, Mimeofacture was the other one. That's just a really goofy way. It's doing the same name thing, which doesn't work great in Commander, but it's just a really goofy way to get a land into play. And even more goofier, you're stealing it from your opponents, and you can replicate it and pay 8 mana to get 2 lands. I mean, this is a landfall deck, so you're doing a lot of that. The possibilities are there for you to actually get a ton of mana, and then I can replicate it a bunch of times and get a bunch of landfall triggers, which is, of course, what you want. So there, another landfall deck, I guess. Obviously, mono blue landfall. That's, the best way to build a Cosima deck. So check that deck out if you feel like it. Let's move on to... I'm going to call this a Elmar Uvenwald Informant deck, although the commander here I hadn't decided. And this one is definitely going to be very open-ended because there is a couple of different commanders. And funny enough, I have this deck originally named Hajar because Hajar, again, I got to use an underwhelming commander, right? Rule number 1. So I'm picking one that's very unpopular, and Hajar, not very good, gives your legendary creatures indestructible, right? Which is not great, is relevant though, because a couple of the creatures that I'm building this deck around are indeed legendary. This is a, and you'll notice a little bit of a theme here where I am very much starting to move more in the direction of building a really interesting theme rather than building around a commander. So in other words, the second method, right? I made a video a while ago talking about choosing your commander, and method 1 is like the Cosima deck, the Cosima deck where I'm building around Cosima, making that deck. Or this deck where I have an idea, I'm building that idea, and then I find a commander where I want to fit that theme, and this is certainly that case. So Hajar will work. Elmar, Uvenwald Informant, which is a Stranger Things cards. I just talked about the Universes Beyond things. This is one of the swapped ones. This is like the kid on the skateboard. They swapped it out to a reskinned Magic card. Still has the Friends Forever on it, which is kind of weird. This guy doesn't look like he has a lot of friends. I don't know, maybe he does. Anyway, this kind of works as well because it is untapping creatures, which I will get more to. The other commander, there's 3 commanders that could be the commander for this deck. Hansk, Slayer Zealot, which funny enough is another Universes Beyond. This is Daryl from, because of course it references the walkers on it. That's how you know it's from the Walking Dead. And again, I kind of wish they took that off. When I saw these, they finally reskinned these, and I was like, why didn't they just say zombie token? Why did they have to say 3 walker tokens? I guess it kind of is relevant, but I wish they would have just said create 3 zombie tokens. The reason why Hansk works as the commander here is because he has a tap ability. And again, all 3 of those commanders, very underwhelming and unpopular. So what are we doing in the deck? This is a deck that I have built before, and I don't think I've put it on my channel, but it's definitely a super interesting deck. I might have talked about it in a 10 deck ideas video. And I revisited it recently for a very specific reason. This deck is essentially built around donating your own stuff, sort of, but you don't want your opponents to have your stuff, right? It's not a Zedru deck where I want my opponents to have my stuff. It's a deck where I'm donating my stuff, but I don't want my opponents to have it. So for example, the 2 cards that essentially the deck is built around, where I have done this before, Humble Defector, which of course draws you 2 cards. That's great, but of course you got to donate to your opponent. And obviously it's been a commander staple forever. The other one, which is very similar, is Stark of Wrath. If you haven't seen it before, because probably a lot of people, and again, this could be your commander, right? But it doesn't, if you're doing the commander thing here, it doesn't work as well. So he's 1 red, 2/2, legendary creature, human rogue, tap, destroy target artifact or creature. That permanent's controller gains control of Stark of Wrath. So again, very similar to Humble Defector, where we have a tap ability, which is important. Again, that's where the whole tapping thing comes in, whether it be the commander that's untapping or the commander that has its own tap ability. Either way, it fits. And then you're donating it. So there's 2 creatures with 2 really, really good tap abilities, but then you have to donate them. And of course, if we build around this theme, we can just get them back, right? We just throw a Homeward Path in the deck. And of course, the reason why this deck is red-green is because there are other options here. Homeward Path is the best. Just having a land that sits there and I can tap it at any time to regain control of not just one, but all of my things. that's the best option. Of course, green can fairly easily go search for a non-basic land and put it into play. So that's why I chose green. There's a couple other things that work really well. Brooding Saurian did get reprinted in C13 because it was getting played in Commander a bit because, people didn't like having their stuff stolen. At the beginning of each end step, each player gains control of all non-token permanents they own. And this one is particularly important because we have other stuff that we want to be donating. I went more into the donate theme, right? The reason I threw this deck together is because I just recently played against my patron's Karn the Betrayer deck, which of course is doing a very similar theme. It doesn't have the tap ability, but you're giving it to your opponents and you're getting some benefit off of it. So it fits the theme. So I'm doing that as well. I also have like Coveted Jewel in here, right? There's another card just a really great card that I can donate to my opponents. I can't get this back with Homeward Path. I mean, you're not donating it, but if they happen to get it, right? I mean, if they don't take it, fine, great. I have a mana rock that draws me 3 cards and taps for 3 mana. But if they take it, I can get it back with my Brooding Saurian. I can't get it back with Homeward Path. There's a couple other things like Brand, for example, right? Obviously, that's going in this deck. I can just 1 mana gain control of all my stuff again. Or if I get into a real pickle, I can use one of my favorite old cards, Telemtor's Edict, which exiles a permanent you own or control. And you draw a card at the beginning of this turn's upkeep. So it's a cantrip. It replaces itself, so you don't have to worry about it being a complete waste. But more importantly, if my opponent gets my, one of those cards that I've donated and I don't really have a good out, then I can use that, right? Telgiad Stylus will work this way as well, where I can tuck it on the bottom of my library, and you do have a lot of search here, so you can go back and get that Humble Defector or whatever later. I also have, because it works really great, with Telgiad Stylus, Avarice Totem, which is a really neat exchange card, right? So you pay 5 mana and exchange control of it and non-land permanent. And I actually had made a Modern deck. It wasn't great, but I made a deck back in the day in Modern where I would exchange my opponent's best thing and then use my Telgiad Stylus to tuck it on the bottom of my library, so they couldn't exchange it back. Because of course, if I use this and steal my opponent's Vorinclex, on their turn they'll just untap and then get their Vorinclex back, and it doesn't accomplish anything. But if you use any of these I give my things back effects, then they don't have the you just have to do it, when they're tapped out, so they can't respond by paying the 5 mana. As long as they don't have 5 mana open, it makes for a really interesting game too as well, right? It's a really neat deck, sort of an exchange theme, but again, usually you're doing that in blue. Here we're doing it green and red. Really neat deck. Again, if you're gonna go after this idea, obviously the deck's made. Depending on the commander you want to use, you might change things up a little bit. Whatever you decide is up to you. All right, let's move on to my Immard deck, and this is the one I talked about in... Oh boy, did I talk about the... So I talked about the charge counter idea in my 10 deck ideas video. And then right after, I'm doing the research and I'm like, I wonder if there's any commanders that actually use charge counters. Immard's the only one I could find, at least for right now. So I was like, okay, but he's not an artifact. You kind of want to do an artifact theme when you're doing charge counters, because obviously most of the cards, not all, but most are using that. But I thought, okay, well now I can revisit another idea of mine that I've sort of done a couple of times, which is the whole liquid metal torque thing of I turn my own stuff into artifacts for various reasons. I did that with Sanwell, right, in my Underwhelming Commanders video, where if you make him into an artifact, he works on himself, right? And so, I have my Core Tapper in play. I can only put charge counters on artifacts. I liquid metal torque. And there are other options, not just liquid metal torque. There's actually a bunch of options that will work here. Turn my commander into an artifact, and then I can put a charge counter on it. It's a charge counter theme, but also I am turning my commander into an artifact, but also I can turn other creatures like my Surakar Spellblade into an artifact creature. So I can do the same thing, right? So I do have other options where I don't need my commander here. I can just put, again, do the liquid metal torque thing to my Surakar Spellblade and put charge counters on it, because whenever it deals combat damage to a player, I get to draw X cards, where X is the number of charge counters on it, right? So that's pretty great. So I do have a lot of other options here. You could probably play this deck without even casting your commander. It certainly is not a monolith deck. There's lots of options here. I mean, you have Lux Cannon and all these other things that you can put charge counters on. Really great options for putting charge counters on, right? I also do have a few things that just work great, like I would put in any Immard deck. So for example, Well Lost Dreams, right? If I have my Well Lost Dreams out, because you have those 2 options with your commander, I'm going to give him Lifelink and Indestructible, because I can just attack. I'm guaranteed to, I'm already attacking if I'm doing that. I guaranteed him getting in for 4 damage, which means I can draw 4 cards off Well I Lost Dreams. Again, that's an auto include if you're putting that deck together. Another auto include, in my opinion, is Swans of Bryn Argal, and this might be a card I have to talk about in a 5 cards video coming up. If you're in any deck, I guess there's not a lot of decks that fit this. If you're in any deck that's in white and blue that's throwing damage around, how many decks is that? I don't know. Because if a source would deal damage to Swans of Bryn Argal, prevent that damage, that source's controller draws cards equal to the damage prevented this way. And of course, your commander is throwing 4 damage around. So that means, again, I want to draw cards. My Swans of Bryn Argal is in play. I attack with my commander. I remove the counter. I shoot my own swans. Because whoever's doing the damage draws the cards here, right? I get to draw 4 cards. And it doesn't die because the damage is prevented, and you can do that every turn if you want to. Great card. Again, I don't know how many decks fit into that category, but auto-include, if you're doing that, works with your opponents too. Yes, if your opponent casts a Blasphemous Act, they're drawing a ton of cards, but I think the risk is worth it there for the payoff. So really interesting deck. Again, it's doing a couple of different things where it's a charge counter deck. That's the main theme, but a little bit of a sub theme of I'm turning stuff into artifacts. And again, you can use it on your opponent's stuff as well. I have a Vandal Blast in hand, Liquid Metal Torque my opponent's Elishnorn. There, now that's going as well, right? So a really neat deck. It all surprisingly works together well. Next up, my Jirina deck that I made, and this one I was seriously considering for myself. I did exactly what I talked about in the video. Again, this was the one where it was the least popular commanders from this year, and I believe this was the least popular commander or second least popular from March of the Machine Aftermath. Really unpopular. You got a commander that's sacrificing itself all the time, which people aren't going to love. You also have a commander that is doing human tribal. So people, again, you look at it and you're like, oh, well, I'm only going to do human tribal, and there's way better commanders for that. Even in white and black, there's way better commanders for that. And also Jirina, just phenomenal fit in the 99. So a lot of people are just playing her in the 99. I'm sure she's graveyard hate, and she gives your team, or at the very least your commander, right? Even if I have just a commander in white and black that is a human, this is definitely worth putting in the deck because I play it, hate on someone's graveyard, and then sacrifice it to protect my commander at some point. Hexproof and indestructible, right? Pretty good. I thought it's a pretty good commander, and I stole my Shanna idea here where we have a very cheap commander that, and in my Shanna deck, my commander doesn't have a sacrifice, but I want to be sacrificing it. Here I want to sacrifice my commander, but also I'm doing the same thing where I have all that stuff that is, again, what white does really, really well. I get those small creatures back from the graveyard and bring them back into play. So we will very rarely ever be recasting our commander, and we'll probably be sacrificing it a lot. Unearth, let's throw in the black stuff as well. Unearth, we'll get our commander back for 1 mana. How about Lurrus? Seems like a pretty good fit in the deck. Recast our commander every turn if we want to. Of course, we have a bunch of other creatures that fit as well. There's a little bit of a sacrifice theme, and yes, there is a little bit of a human theme. I started going down the rabbit hole with this, and I started finding some really interesting things that work. So Planar Collapse, for instance, which funny enough, when I made a Lurrus deck, I had in there because it is a 2-mana card that I can get back from the grave. This is the cheapest board wipe out there, guys, in case you've never seen this card before. 1 and a white enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 4 or more creatures in play, sacrifice it and destroy all creatures. 2 mana, destroy all creatures. This is, as far as I know, the cheapest board wipe there is in all of the game of Magic. But of course, you got to wait till your upkeep. That's not great. That's one of the downsides of it. But because it's an enchantment, you can get it back. And also, it works particularly good here because, of course, our commander gives our team indestructible, right? So not every creature in this deck is human, but there is a lot. So I can, when my Planar Collapse it triggers on my upkeep, I can, in response, sacrifice my commander. My whole team's indestructible. Everyone else's creatures die. Mine do not. And then, maybe if I get lucky, I can get back out of the graveyard and do it again. Getting my commander out of the graveyard is not a problem. Magetta the Lion will also work here, right? There's some really neat combos you can do here. Magetta the Lion is a human. That's right. It's a human spell shaper that no longer a legend. It is a legendary creature, human spell shaper. That is the new creature type there. And it is a board wipe stapled on a creature, right? 2 white, tap, discard 2 cards, destroy all creatures except Magetta the Lion. They can't be regenerated. So Magetta doesn't kill himself. So again, we just sacrifice our commander, use this ability, our whole team survives, and get our commander back and maybe rinse and repeat. So there's some really neat combos there. And the neatest combo of all in this deck, which I was so pumped that it fit, but it's a little hard to use. High Priest of Penance is indeed a human. That's right. It is because I was looking through those white-black humans. High Priest of Penance is a human, and wouldn't you know it, there is a human that we want to make indestructible. I talked about this in a short, really neat combo with Last Laugh, and I ended up throwing that in the deck, right? So how this combo works is, well, Last Laugh says whenever a permanent other than Last Laugh is put in a graveyard from the battlefield, deals 1 damage to each creature and each player. So, of course, when that happens, it triggers, deals a damage to our High Priest of Penance, which, when he's dealt damage, you destroy a non-land permanent, which then, that goes to the graveyard, assuming nobody has a Leyline of the Void in play. Rest in peace. It will trigger your Last Laugh again, and you will repeat the process so long as your High Priest of Penance is indestructible, which, of course, because it's a human, our commander can make it indestructible. Pretty neat combo in this deck. The only problem is, and I was pretty bummed because I was going to get this combo off, and then I realized it's actually a little more, it's not as easy as I thought, because when you sacrifice your commander to make your High Priest of Penance indestructible, that triggers your Last Laugh. So again, getting into the whole stack issue, before your High Priest, before that ability resolves and your High Priest of Penance is actually indestructible, the Last Laugh will kill it. So you would think, oh, it's perfect. I sack my commander, make my High Priest of Penance indestructible, and the Last Laugh then triggers from my Jirina. And no, the way it resolves, it actually doesn't work out. So what you just have to time it appropriately. You have to sack your Jirina first, then play the Last Laugh. Right? Or maybe find out some way to bump your High Priest of Penance power or toughness, right? Something like that. If you want to build more around that ability, you can. I just threw it in there because it fit. High Priest of Penance fits. That's just a good fit in the deck. Again, someone could cast a Blasphemous Act and you can sack your Jirina in response, save your whole team, and your High Priest of Penance is still taking damage even though it's indestructible. It won't die. That's how indestructible works. It doesn't die from the damage, but it will still take the damage and it will trigger and you get the, right? So that still does work. It's a great creature to give indestructible to, and it happens to be a human. So just a really neat deck. Again, I was really on the fence about this one. As it happens, I have another white-black deck that I'm seriously considering put together that got bumped ahead of this. But this is a really neat deck. I like it a lot. All right, my Neyam Huggy deck. That's right, another white-black deck. And no, this is not the one. There's actually a third. I mean, 3 white-black. I really want a white-black deck. I love that color combination. And I haven't had an Orzhov deck in forever. So I've been experimenting with a few, and this was one. I really like this as a commander. Again, this is another commander that I talked about in the, this might have been like this shockingly underrated. Like, I think this is a great commander. It was one of my favorites from the Warhammer 40K set. Has a really neat, interesting ability, very political. And I just decided to go with a very political theme here. And this is very much the idea, then the commander gets added. Funny enough, it just sort of worked out where, okay, I like this as a commander. And as I was looking through the white-black commanders to fit this theme, I was like, actually, this actually fits. And the reason it fits is because this deck is a little political. So if you're looking for sort of a political, little group huggy-ish sort of deck, group huggy with a twist though, like I'll give you a very obvious, for instance, Sizan Perverter of Truth is in this deck. And a Sizan Perverter of Truth deck would be doing this, obviously, a lot. This is essentially sort of the white-black version of a Sizan Perverter of Truth deck. So, you know, I want my opponents to draw cards and have a big hand, but I'm punishing them for it, is essentially what's going on here, right? So Price of Knowledge, right? Got that in there because that, of course, is going to fit. That's what you're doing in the deck, right? I got Vice Sling, all that kind of stuff that you would normally do in that deck. Then again, I have the white stuff as well that fits really good. And there is surprisingly a lot because white wants to do the political card draw thing. At least it used to. Now white just draws cards really well. So Oblation, right? Old commander favorite where that's a great removal spell. A lot of people still use this. I think we got so much great white removal now. I don't know. I can never find room for this. But it's great in the political sphere where I'm giving my opponent 2 cards. You can also use it on yourself. Yes, that's why a lot of people still play it for that reason. In this deck, I want my opponent to draw cards. So this is double whammy for me, right? It's extra good. Secret Rendezvous, a card that I played for about 3 seconds. I ordered a copy, put it in my Patron of the Kitsune deck, and I'm like, we started getting cards come out right after that. It's like, okay, Welcoming Vampire, that's way better. I'm going to put that in instead, right? But it works really good here. Brina, the Demagogue, works great in this theme. And you could put Brina as the commander here, I suppose. Again, I do the underwhelming thing. The reason why Neyam works here is because It's putting cards in it's doing the political thing, but it also puts cards in your opponent's hands, which is kind of funny because you're doing, yeah, you want your opponents to draw, but your sort of your win con here is your opponent's having a big hand, and Neyam puts stuff in filling your opponent's hands. It's not doing it great, but funny enough, again, there are cards that work in that theme in white, right? So for example, Spur Mage Advocate. 1 white mana creature that you can tap and return 2 target cards from an opponent's graveyard to their hand and destroy target attacking creature. So, destroy target attacking creature, great ability, but we got to put 2 cards in our opponent's hands. Well, guess what? Now we're turning that downside into an upside. Again, that's what I like about this. This deck is sort of reversing the polarity here, where I'm taking the downside and turning it into an upside for me because I have an Ebony Owl Netsuke in play, and I want my opponent to have a big hand so that they're taking damage from it, right? Pulse Mage Advocate, another card that does that. Return 3 cards from an opponent's graveyard to their hand, and you get to return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So again, it's funny enough, it's doing very much the same thing as our commander is doing. Very similar. Cheat a big creature into play. Okay, yes, please. Or just get our commander back, whatever. Doesn't really matter because we want our opponent to have more cards in hand, right? It actually works. White does that theme really well. So if you combine the white and the black, actually works really, really well together, right? And then, of course, because we're in black, we get the Underworld Dreams effects as well, where we're punishing our opponents for drawing. Again, it's the big hand size thing, but also they are getting a lot of draw triggers as well. So pretty great deck. Again, it's a little political, and I always loved it. Like Saizan, Perverter of Truth is one of my... I used to have a guy that I played with regularly that had that deck, and I loved it. It was just so fun to play against because it's sort of that huggy, like, oh yeah, I get to draw cards, but I'm taking a ton of damage. So it's actually really fun in a commander. This is a really fun deck. I like it a lot. And a really underrated commander as well. It, again, is a deck where you probably could go the whole game without casting your commander. You don't need to. I would probably save it. This is definitely a deck where I would probably wait till later in the game to get my commander out when there's some stuff in my graveyard that I really want to get back. Really neat deck. All right, approaching the end, and this one is a little less original, funny enough. It is a Shadowborn Apostle deck. Again, this is another one where, I'm moving more in this direction where I'm just like, okay, I have an idea, and now I need to find a commander to build around it. I made a Shadowborn Apostle deck, which everyone's like, yeah, who hasn't seen that before? Have you seen a black-green version? That's what I built. I've never seen a black-green version of this deck. I built a black-green version. Usually, Athreos, for the longest time, that was the Shadowborn Apostle commander. I don't know how many other commanders have been used. I think you can make a really neat black-green version. Golgari is great in the sacrifice. You're in the sacrifice theme. And of course, that's great. Now, what's the commander I used? Of course, I didn't use Marin. You could make a fantastic Marin deck, of course, in this theme. Wants the dies triggers. It all works. Absolutely. I use Storev, Devkrin Leech, which is the poor man's Marin, I guess. It's getting creatures out of your graveyard. It works. You could definitely Marin or a lot of other, there's probably a couple. Savra, right? There's probably a couple. Sacrifice, again, that's why it works great in the blue, black, green colors. There's probably a couple commanders that you could swap out here. There's a couple cards like El Adamri that just work really good with Storev specifically that you could maybe take out. Zombie Master, again, works because your commander's a zombie, gives it Swamp Walk and Regenerate. That's why those cards are in the deck. So you could swap those out if you want to use, a commander that's maybe better. But there's a couple of really neat cards that actually work in green here. Nantuko Shrine is one of them. It's a little janky, but it works here. 1 green enchantment. Whenever a player casts a spell, that player creates X 1/1 green squirrel creature tokens, where X is the number of cards in all graveyards with the same name as that spell. So the same name thing works here. That's what I wanted to do. I was doing, again, if you look back to the blue same name cards that I used in the Cosima deck, I was doing some research for some same name stuff. And I was like, where else could you do the same name thing? And I was like, oh yeah, any of those cards that you can have any number of them in your deck. Of course, I can have any number of Shadowborn Apostles in this deck, and I have 24 Shadowborn Apostles in this deck. I think that's a good amount. I don't know how many people, most people put in their Shadowborn Apostles deck, but that's what I put in here. So of course, with Nantuko Shrine, every time I cast a Shadowborn Apostle, I'm making X 1/1 green squirrel creature tokens, where X is the number of Shadowborn Apostles in my grave. If anyone else is playing a Shadowborn Apostles deck, if you got a guy in your play group with a Shadowborn Apostles deck that he always kicks your butt with, this is the way to, man, you are going to crush him with this one. Because yeah, there's a lot of effects. Actually, it might be helping him. Let's go look at the other cards and find out. Because the other really interesting one is Blood Bond March. This might help him out. 2 green and a black enchantment. Whenever a player casts a creature spell, each player returns all cards with the same name as that spell from their graveyard to the battlefield. So this is the reason why I wanted to make this deck black-green, because of this card. This is a really powerful effect in this deck, because every time I cast a Shadowborn Apostle, I get all my Shadowborn Apostles back from my graveyard. So, of course, things get out of hand real fast. And yeah, if I guess if your buddy has like an Athreos Shadowborn Apostles deck, he's getting all his back as well. But every time he does it, you get all yours back. So that could make for an interesting game. Another really neat one I found in green, Pack Hunt. 3 and a green sorcery. Search your library for up to 3 cards with the same name as target creature. Reveal them and put them into your hand. So 4 mana is not bad, right? Search your library for 3 cards with the same name as target creature. So I have 1 Shadowborn Apostle in play. I can go get 3 more out of my library and put them in my hand for 4 mana. That seems pretty good. So there are a couple neat fits here with as far as the green cards. I mean, I have the black ones as well that typically fit, but there's a lot of really neat ones in green as well. So it is a green and black Shadowborn Apostles deck. If you're interested, the deck list is in the description. And finally, the deck that I was really close to putting together in paper, my Shigeki Jukai Visionary deck, that it's just a really neat deck with a lot of really neat interactions. It's not super strong at all. It's a lands deck, but not really. And I know people will say, oh, lands deck in green? What's the problem there? I'm doing a lot of really different janky things in this deck that you don't normally see, which is why it's not as nearly as powerful as a mono green lands deck could be. Again, I was really close to putting together in paper, and I got one deck that I was like, I think I want to make that deck more. I bumped it ahead, and then I bumped another deck ahead, which ended up being another lands deck, my Boros lands deck. And I'm like, I don't think I want 2 decks that are, even though they're very different. That the Boros lands deck is more of a sacrifice lands theme, and this is more of a putting lands in my graveyard and then getting them back. There's a lot of weird interactions here. Of course, that's what your commander's doing, right? Your commander it's filling your graveyard. So you're going to return it to your hand, reveal the top 4 cards, you put a land into play, and then you put stuff in your graveyard. So you're putting stuff in your graveyard. You're also putting lands into play, but also you have that channel effect where you can get stuff out of your graveyard as well. So I'm playing into all of that. All of those abilities. This really is a great Shigeki deck. Again, if you have a Shigeki deck already, I probably have some really neat ideas here that you could be using. Ultimately, though, it is a lands deck. So there is a number of things I'm doing that work with the lands theme and also work with my commander, if that makes any sense. So I am dumping things in my graveyard a lot, right? So I have Life from the Loam. So I'm doing that. Obviously, if I look at the top 4 cards and there's a bunch of lands, I'll put 1 into play and the rest in the graveyard, and then I can Life from the Loam, get it back. I can also dump my Life from the Loam into my graveyard with my commander and then get it back because it is dredge. Again, I imagine a lot of people with Shigeki decks probably have Life from the Loam. They're probably already doing that. Deep Root Wayfinder is a really neat one. I mean, green can get lands out of graveyards fairly easily. This is a neat one people might not be aware of. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player or battle, surveil 1. Then you may return a land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So the surveil thing works with I kind of maybe want stuff in my graveyard if that thing on top is something I want in my graveyard, but also it gets lands out of my graveyard if I want to do that. Skola Grove Dancer, right? Whenever a land is put in your graveyard from anywhere, you gain 1 life. So I'm doing that as well. And of course, because of that, I also have cards like Ayula's Influence, because there is a chance I will end up with a lot of cards in my hand or in my graveyard. There's definitely a lot of things you might want to set up in this deck where an Ayula's Influence might not be great until you get to the right scenario. Again, I sort of revisited an idea I've done a few times before with Creeping Renaissance where, okay, now once I have 20 cards in my graveyard, 20 land cards in my graveyard, I can choose land and get all of them back and fill my hand, right? Which again it works with what we're doing, but it works with also where we're going, if that makes any sense. Paradise Lost, which is the first and only uncard I've ever put in a deck. It's just a great card. Roll 2d6 dice, return any number of cards with total mana value, X or less from your graveyard to your hand, where X is the total of those results, and then you exile it. It's even an instant. So, of course, I can get some stuff back, but it's getting all my lands back, right? In a lands theme, if you're discarding lands or putting lots of lands in your graveyard, this is a great fit because you can get all the lands back and then a few other things as well, right? And once we get all those lands into our hand, now we can do some really nasty things with them. Like, for example, one of my favorite cards that I've been wanting to put in a deck for a long, long time, Nantuko Cultivator, is just such a slam dunk here, where I can get all those lands in them. And you don't need 20. You could do 3 or 4. It's still good. But if you got 20, now I can cast this guy, discard 20 lands out of my hand. This guy becomes a 22/22. And also I get to draw 20 cards. Pretty great, right? Pretty great. And then I can flash back my Creeping Renaissance, put 20 more lands into my hand, or I guess the same 20 lands, and then I can do the Cultivator Colossus combo and just put all those lands directly into play. Or I can do, right, I have a lot of neat combos like that. Scouting Trek is another one where it works in a couple of different ways, right? 1 NA green sorcery. Search your library for any number of basic land cards, reveal those cards, shuffle your library and put them on top. So this is a way to put a ton of lands right on top of my library. And a lot of people did the Abundance combo with Cultivator Colossus. This will work as well. So I have a couple things you can do with the Cultivator Colossus, where now I can take all my lands if I want to go nuts, put them on, stack them on top of my library, right? And when this enters the battlefield, you put a land card from your hand on the battlefield tapped. So you would have to have all land, just one, in your hand. So you could just wait till the next turn if you had to draw that first land off the top. But then, of course, you repeat the process and you just put all those lands directly into play. Pretty neat combo in the deck. Other things that I'm doing in the deck, though, because I just started to notice all these trends that sort of fit, like the life gain theme. Funny enough, you know, again, getting back to the Skola Grove Dancer, I'm like, okay, every time a land's going in my graveyard, I gain a life. And again, if I stack a bunch of lands on top of my library and use my commander, that's a great way to get lands into my graveyard, because now I'm dumping, I put one into play and then I dump the rest into my graveyard, right? So that also works. But I'm getting a bunch of life gain triggers as well. And I'm like, okay, well, there's a lot of landfall things that also gain you life, like Primeval Bounty, right? Funny old commander card that doesn't really get played much anymore. Has a lot of great stuff, but whenever a land enters the battlefield in your control, you gain 3 life. Okay, well, that's not bad. Titania, Voice of Gaia. Whenever one or more lands is put in your graveyard from anywhere, you gain 2 life. Okay, so I'm starting to think there's actually quite a bit of life gain theme here in this scenario. Retreat to Kazundu. Whenever land enters the battlefield in your control, you can put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, or you gain 2 life. So there's a lot in here, and I didn't even put it all. You could actually, there's a few more landfall creatures, I think, that when they enter the battlefield, you can gain life. I also have Silverback Elder in here, which is, again, a slam dunk in a Shigeki deck, because whenever you cast a creature spell, you get to choose one. And of course, your commander, because you're returning it to your hand, you're recasting it all the time, right? And if I've gotten into the situation, I've gotten into some really neat situations with this deck. I have Emerald Medallion in the deck, so of course, my commander only costs 1 green mana. And I also, of course, have like Lightning Greaves in the deck, so I can use my commander right away. So you can sometimes get into the situation where I can use my commander's ability like 3 or 4 times in a turn. And if I have my Silverback Elder in the deck, then I can destroy a bunch of artifacts or enchantments, or you gain 4 life. I can do that as well. So I have Well of Lost Dreams in this deck because there isn't enough life gain options. Like I say all the time, if your deck is gaining life consistently, Well of Lost Dreams is like the best card draw option you have in any color combination. It's a great card draw option here as well. But I threw a few more in here, right? Ageless Entity. A lot of people are going to see stuff like this and go, what's that doing in the deck? You know, I think there's enough, and I know there's enough because I've play tested this deck quite a bit. There's enough life gain triggers here to warrant cards like this, right? Another really neat fit in this deck is Sproutback Trudge. 7 green, Fungus Beast, 9/7. This spell costs X less 2 cast, where X is the amount of life you gain this turn. That's why that's in the deck. But also, beginning your end step, if you gain life this turn, you may cast it from your graveyard. So that fits the I dump things into my graveyard theme, right? I've done it a few times where my Shigeki's doing his thing, because that's what, in this deck, that's all I'm doing. Early in the game, I'm just Shigeki, ramping, throwing stuff in my graveyard. Maybe I want it there, maybe I don't. Again, if I don't love the self-mill because I can throw stuff in my graveyard that I want, like I really wanted that Nantuko Cultivator so I could cast it, but again, this is built around all my commander's abilities, right? So I have those regrowth effects in here as well. I have that Wildest Dreams in here as well, so I can get the stuff out of the graveyard that I want back. So it almost becomes card draw, or almost tutoring, where I can tutor for the card I want out of my graveyard. There's so many cards in here that oddly fit the theme of what I'm doing. You know, if you look at the commander again, it's actually doing a lot where it's putting lands into play. So you're doing the landfall thing, It's also returning itself to hand. It's also dumping stuff in graveyard, and it's also doing that regrowth effect. So there's actually a lot to build around here, and I built around all of it. And then on top of that, I did a little bit of a late game theme as well. Really, really neat deck. Again, it just got bumped to the point now where I'm like, I don't know if I'll ever put it together. It's a really neat deck if you're looking for one. All the deck lists for these guys are in the description below. Feel free to check them out if you're interested. Make any revisions you want. Again, these are ideas that you can run with yourself. These are the deck lists I made. Swap out any cards you want. Let me know if you're going after these. I'd be curious to know if anyone's going to actually grab these for themselves. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.